My name is Savannah Mitchell. I'm 29 years old, a software engineer living in Boulder, Colorado. And just 4 minutes and 37 seconds ago, my father threatened to cut me out of his will. No hi, no how have you been? Just, if you don't come to Caleb's wedding, you're done. No inheritance. I remember glancing at the timer on my phone as the call ended. 4:37. I laughed so hard I had to set the phone down. Not the kind of laugh that bubbles from joy, but the brittle, breathless kind that shatters the quiet. Before we go further, if you've ever been made to feel like background noise in your own family, this story is for you. And if it hits home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this channel with someone who needs to know. Family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up. Now, back to that moment. I was sitting in my apartment, barefoot on the warm wooden floor, coffee cooling beside my keyboard, the Rockies glowing gold outside the window. You'd think a threat like that might sting, but it didn't. Not anymore. What got me laughing was the fact that he finally noticed I was gone. 6 whole months after I left. 6 months. And now I'm supposed to what? Pop back into the Mitchell family narrative like nothing happened. Play loyal daughter for a wedding photo Caleb's fiancé's parents can frame. He didn't ask where I lived, didn't ask how I was doing. Just, you need to be there. The absurdity of it all made the laughter worse. The kind where your ribs ache and your throat burns, but something inside you feels lighter, freer with every second. I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my hoodie. Not out of sadness, just relief. Because for the first time in 29 years, I realized that I didn't owe them anything. No explanations. No apologies. Not even a reply. I stared at the spot on the floor where the late afternoon light hit just right, dancing through the trees. The same spot I sat on when I first moved in, surrounded by boxes and quiet, and the terrifying beauty of starting over. I remember that moment like it was stitched into the walls. The hum of my laptop powering on, the echo of emptiness, the first breath of my own space, my own life. Back then, I hadn't told a soul in my family I was leaving Durham. No farewell dinner, no text, not even a post-it on the fridge. I just left. And for 6 months, not one of them noticed. Not until now, when they needed me to polish their image. I stood and stretched, the soft creak of my bones grounding me. My mind flashed to a moment I hadn't let myself think about in years. Me at 11, standing in the hallway after winning my school's science competition. I'd built a solar-powered water purifier and tested it myself using runoff from the neighbor's lawn. I was so proud, gripping that blue ribbon with sweaty palms, waiting for someone, anyone to care. All I got was, "That's nice, sweetie." Then they spent the next hour raving about Caleb's soccer scrimmage. Not even a real game, just a pass he made during practice. That was the first time I felt it, the sensation of being invisible in your own home. It wouldn't be the last. I paced across the room, each footstep echoing the timeline of a life lived in the shadow of someone else's spotlight. I used to think if I worked harder, achieved more, stayed quiet, maybe they'd finally see me. But some families aren't blind. They just choose what and who they want to see. And now, 6 months after I vanished from their radar, they suddenly remember I exist? Not because they miss me, but because Caleb needs a flawless backdrop to his perfect wedding. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, letting the silence settle. I used to crave their approval like oxygen. Now, I don't even crave their presence. The truth is, I didn't answer that call because I cared what he thought. I answered it to measure the exact moment my past no longer had power over me. 4 minutes, 37 seconds. That's all it took to know I'd made the right decision. And I wasn't going back. 6 months earlier. The hallway of my apartment smelled like cardboard and dust, a scent I now associate with freedom. Half-packed boxes lined the walls, some sealed, others half open, spilling out fragments of a life I was about to leave behind. "Girl, what are you planning to do with all these books?" Monica grunted, hugging a heavy box to her chest as she shuffled in from the kitchen. Her curls were pulled into a frizzy bun, her cheeks flushed from effort. You opening a library in Colorado? I let out a soft laugh, tugging a strip of packing tape across another box. Most of them are going to a used bookstore. I just haven't figured out which ones I can part with yet. Monica dropped the box with a thud near the door and flopped onto the arm of the couch, the only furniture I hadn't sold. You sure about this? She asked, the weight of the question more serious than the one she'd just set down. Like, 100% sure? You haven't told anyone in your family you're leaving? That question again. Everyone kept asking it, as if I owed people who never saw me the courtesy of a farewell. I paused, the tape hanging loose from my fingers. They don't even know where I live now, Mon. Why would I tell them I'm moving across the country? From the kitchen, Tyler appeared with a mug in each hand. He handed me the one with chipped edges, my favorite, and leaned against the doorway. Didn't your mom text you last Christmas? I snorted. A 2-word message, Happy Holidays, sent at 9:03 p.m., no call, no follow-up. He looked down, silent. That was the thing with Monica and Tyler. They knew the basics. Caleb was the golden boy, my parents were present in the technical sense, but I never unloaded the full story. Until now, standing in the shell of my old apartment, I finally felt like I could. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, the cold pressing through my jeans. It grounded me as old memories crept in, uninvited but persistent. When I was 8, I said slowly, I won first place at the state science fair, built a working prototype of a water filtration system. My teacher called home, said I was one of the brightest students she'd ever taught. I came home with the ribbon clutched in my hand, heart pounding, hoping for something. Monica leaned forward, eyes soft. And? They barely looked up from the TV. Dad muttered, That's nice, sweetheart, and then spent the next 20 minutes talking about Caleb's JV scrimmage. A practice, not even a real game. Silence settled, heavy and tender. That sucks, Tyler said finally, sitting beside me on the floor. That really sucks. It got worse, I continued. When Caleb got accepted into Georgetown, they threw him a backyard party with string lights and catered barbecue. When I got into MIT on a full ride, Monica, my mom said, Well, I guess we don't have to worry about paying for you then. That was it. That was the celebration. I didn't say it for pity. I said it because the words had been stuck in my throat for over a decade, and speaking them now felt like extracting splinters. Monica reached out, squeezed my hand. You've carried all this alone for so long. I nodded, but not anymore. She smiled, blinking fast. Damn right. The three of us sat there for a while, backs against the wall, surrounded by taped-up boxes and the quiet hum of a heater that never quite worked right. Later, as the sun dipped low, we shared greasy takeout on the floor, our final dinner in a place that had seen my lowest lows and quiet victories. Tyler wiped his hands with a napkin and looked over. What time's your flight? Tomorrow, 10:15 a.m. I've got a window seat. I already shipped most of my stuff, just carrying the essentials with me. And still no word to the parents? I shook my head. Nope. You ever think they'll notice? He asked, not unkindly. I stared out the window at the fading sky. Eventually, but only when it inconveniences them. And I wasn't going to wait around for that. After the last box was taped shut that night, I found myself lingering in the corner of the living room, staring at the outline of sunlight fading on the wall. It reminded me of something I couldn't quite name, maybe all the times I stood still, waiting to be seen. Funny how moving forward makes the past reach back with both hands. Monica had gone to pick up dessert. Tyler was dozing on the couch, arms crossed, chin tucked down. The quiet gave me room to remember, and once the memories started, they didn't stop. I was 7 the first time I noticed something was off. Not just unfair, but intentional. It was a Thursday afternoon. The school gym smelled like sweat and orange slices, and I had just been awarded Young Inventor of the Month for my homemade light-sensing alarm. It was clunky, made of wires and cardboard, but it worked. My teacher, Ms. Doherty, pulled me aside and told me she thought I was brilliant. I ran home with the certificate clutched in both hands. Caleb was already at the dinner table when I burst through the door, breathless. "Mom, Dad, look!" They barely glanced up. "That's great, honey," my mom said without warmth. "Caleb, tell your dad what Coach said about your footwork today." That was it. No questions, no interest, just a throwaway comment before they turned back to his story. It's strange how a child can feel invisible while standing right in front of two people who are supposed to love her unconditionally. At the time, I told myself they were just tired, distracted, maybe they hadn't heard me properly, but it kept happening. When I was 9 and built a model wind turbine that powered a small fan, they said, "Just don't electrocute yourself." When I was 11 and took 3rd place in the regional science fair, they smiled politely, then spent the entire car ride home arguing about what color tie Caleb should wear to his spring recital. At 12, I got straight A's for 3 semesters in a row. I taped the report card to the fridge. The next morning, it had been replaced by a flyer for Caleb's baseball fundraiser. I didn't cry. I just stopped putting things on the fridge. Years later, I overheard my dad tell a neighbor, "Caleb's going places. Savannah's smart, sure, but Caleb's got presence." I wasn't even mad. I was just numb. It wasn't just about favoritism. It was the accumulation of 1,000 dismissals, 1,000 tiny betrayals that told me my worth was conditional, that I could do everything right and still be invisible. The worst part? I believed them. For a long time, I really thought there must have been something wrong with me, some fundamental flaw I couldn't see. Why else would my own parents act like I was background noise? I remember asking my grandmother once, quietly, in her garden, while she tended her tomatoes, "Grandma, do you think I'm hard to love?" She turned to me, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "No, sweetheart. I think some people are just blind to what they don't understand." That moment stayed with me. It was the first time someone made me feel like I wasn't broken, just misread. Back in the present, Tyler stirred awake and looked over at me. "You good?" I nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." He studied me for a second. "You don't have to go through all this alone, you know." "I know," I said, offering a faint smile. "But it's different now. I used to think that if I did enough, they'd eventually notice, that being excellent would make me undeniable. And now? Now I don't need them to notice. I just need to keep going." The door opened and Monica walked in, balancing 2 plastic bags. "Hope you're ready for a sugar coma. I brought key lime pie and something called Death by Chocolate." "Perfect," I said. "I feel like something needs to die tonight." We laughed. Not because things were okay, but because sometimes laughter is the only way to mark the distance between who you were and who you're becoming. And I was becoming someone who didn't need their applause, just peace. It wasn't just the little things that made me leave. It was the years that stacked like bricks, one on top of the other, until the wall between me and my family was tall enough to cast permanent shadow. The final bricks were laid when I turned 18. I still remember the day, a humid July afternoon in Durham, cicadas buzzing like faulty wiring outside our windows. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table. My acceptance letter to MIT was folded neatly in front of them. I thought we were celebrating. Instead, Dad cleared his throat and slid a manila folder toward me. "We need to talk about your college plans." I blinked. "I already made them." Mom chimed in, her voice carrying that gentle edge she reserved for bad news she thought I'd take well. "Savannah, we're so proud of you. But the truth is, the education fund went to Caleb." The words didn't register at first. "What do you mean it went to Caleb?" I asked, genuinely confused. Dad rubbed his temples. "He needed help getting through med school. His tuition, rent, textbooks, it adds up. You're smart. You'll figure something out." I sat there, staring at them, trying to process how this could be real. "So, nothing? Not even 1 semester?" They both shook their heads, calm, unapologetic. "You'll be fine," Mom added, as if reassurance could replace money. "You're resilient, and Caleb's future depends on this." I didn't say anything. I just stood up, left the table, and walked straight into the backyard, barefoot, because my body needed to move before my voice could scream. That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, applied for every scholarship I could find, and made a spreadsheet color-coded by deadline and award amount. Then I found 2 part-time jobs within walking distance, one at a used bookstore, the other cleaning office buildings after hours. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the quiet understanding that my future didn't matter to them as much as Caleb's did. And I refused to let that be the end of my story. Monica was the first person I told about it sometime during sophomore year. We were pulling an all-nighter at the campus library, neck-deep in code and coffee, and I let it slip, just a sentence or two. Her eyes had filled with something between disbelief and fury. Wait. Are you telling me your parents paid Caleb's med school tuition but gave you nothing for MIT? Nothing, I repeated. Not $1. Savannah, that's insane. Yeah, well, it's not surprising. After that, I stopped glossing over the truth. I stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt. There's only so many times you can call neglect a misunderstanding before it starts to rot inside you. I worked all through college, slept maybe 4 hours a night, lived on black coffee and cheap granola bars, missed holidays because I couldn't afford the plane ticket or the emotional toll. Freshman year Thanksgiving, Mom sent me a photo of the family dinner. Caleb beaming at the center of the table, surrounded by ham and cornbread and a wine bottle with a ribbon on it. No note, no "we miss you." Just the image, like I was supposed to smile at it from my dorm room and feel included. Instead, I ordered takeout and wrote 30 lines of Python to forget the pang in my chest. By the time I graduated, I'd paid for everything myself. Not just tuition and books, but my independence, brick by silent brick. I crossed that stage in my cap and gown, looking out into the crowd, and felt no disappointment when my family wasn't there. They hadn't earned a seat. Tyler and Monica were waiting outside, holding sunflowers and yelling my name so loudly security side-eyed them. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't missing a family. I was building one. The first thing I noticed about Boulder was how the air felt different, crisper, lighter, like the weight of other people's expectations couldn't cling to it the way it did back home in Durham. I arrived with 2 checked bags, a carry-on, and no intention of ever looking back. My apartment was modest, 3rd floor walk-up, no elevator, no central air, but the windows faced the Flatirons, and every morning they glowed with that golden pink light I'd only ever seen on postcards. I remember standing in the doorway that first night, shoes off, the boxes I shipped piled around me, and thinking, this isn't just a new place. This is a reset. A knock pulled me out of my thoughts. Monica and Tyler stood outside holding groceries and a bottle of cheap wine. You didn't think we were going to let you unpack in silence, did you? Tyler grinned, already stepping in. We brought sustenance, Monica added, waving a bag of frozen dumplings and a pint of Rocky Road. They spread out like they lived there, flipping open boxes and tossing bubble wrap like confetti. I watched them with quiet amusement. You two act like I'm about to start a new life or something. Monica raised an eyebrow. You are. I smiled, but it trembled at the edges. I wasn't used to this. The unspoken understanding, the way they showed up without needing a reason. I'm proud of you, Tyler said, pausing by the window. Seriously, you made this happen. You built this. It still feels unreal sometimes, I admitted, dropping onto the floor beside an unopened box. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Monica joined me, tucking her legs beneath her. It's not going to. You're not in survival mode anymore, Sav. This isn't temporary. You earned it. That word, earned, hit somewhere deep, because for so long I had equated value with struggle. If I wasn't exhausted, I didn't feel worthy. If I wasn't chasing validation, I didn't know what to do with stillness. I looked around the apartment. The battered coffee table I'd found on Facebook Marketplace, the stack of tech manuals I actually had time to read now, the worn couch from a thrift store in Boulder that I bought with my own money. This life wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Later that evening, after dumplings and wine and a half-hearted attempt at building a shelf, we sat on the floor in a circle, our backs against the wall. No one said much. We didn't need to. It was Monica who finally broke the silence. "Do you think your family knows you're gone?" I exhaled through my nose. "Not yet, but they'll notice when they want something." "You don't think they'll reach out just to check in?" Tyler asked it carefully, like he already knew the answer but hoped he was wrong. "They haven't before," I said, shrugging. "I moved here without telling them, partly because I didn't want to deal with the fake concern, but mostly because I knew they wouldn't ask." The room went still. Monica looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. "I didn't need a goodbye," I added. "I just needed to go." The truth was, I'd stopped expecting them to care a long time ago, and when you stop expecting something, you start building around the absence. I was done begging for room at their table. I was building my own. The next morning, after my friends left, I stood barefoot in the kitchen holding a mug of coffee, watching the sun peek over the mountains. My first Monday in Boulder. My first day at the new job. A real tech firm, real benefits, real salary, no more ramen for dinner, no more sleeping through holidays because I couldn't afford a flight home, no more shrinking myself just to be tolerable. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the front camera, and snapped a photo of my reflection in the kitchen window. Messy bun, hopeful eyes, morning light behind me. No filters, no makeup, just me. And for the first time in years, I saved the photo not because I wanted someone else to see it, but because I wanted to remember it. It was a Tuesday morning, one of those crisp, cloudless Colorado days that made even the smallest rituals feel golden. I had just brewed a fresh pot of coffee and was halfway through an email to my team when my phone rang. Unknown number. My thumb hovered over the decline button. Usually I didn't even hesitate. But something about this one, the area code maybe, or that quiet hum of instinct in my chest, made me answer. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in over a year. "Savannah." My father, sharp, irritated. Not surprised, just annoyed, like I'd missed a scheduled appointment he hadn't bothered to make. I stood frozen, mug still in hand, coffee steaming toward the ceiling. "Hi," I said flatly, offering nothing else. "You need to come home for dinner next Saturday," he said, like I was still 18 and he was still the authority I'd once tried to impress. "Caleb's fiance's parents want to meet you. They're traditional. Family matters to them." I almost laughed, but it came out as a breath through my nose. "So now I'm family. This is important for Caleb's future." Of course it was. I turned and leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out at the mountains like they might offer me patience. "I'm not coming." Silence. Then, "What do you mean you're not coming?" "I mean what I said. I'm not flying back to play family mascot for a dinner party I wasn't even invited to until 5 seconds ago." His voice sharpened. "This is bigger than you. Your absence would raise questions. This isn't the time for stubbornness." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my temple, but the pressure in my chest wasn't from guilt, it was fury, cold and precise. "You want honesty?" I asked, finally. "Here it is. 1, you don't have a perfect family. You have Caleb, and then you have me, the afterthought. 2, I'm not interested in pretending otherwise for the sake of some strangers. And 3, I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I can't come because I moved to Colorado 6 months ago." The silence on the other end was exquisite. I could almost hear his brain scrambling to make the math work. "You moved without telling us?" "You never asked where I lived," I said lightly. "Why would I tell you?" His voice erupted. "How dare you move across the country and keep it from your family? What's your address? We need to know where you are." "You don't even remember my old address," I replied, my tone soft and surgical. "You never visited, never called. So why would you suddenly care?" "Savannah, that's not the point." "It's exactly the point." I hung up. My phone lit up almost instantly. First it was Dad again, then Mom, then Caleb. Each call was ignored, each text left unread. "Mom, family is important. We shouldn't fight like this." "Caleb, just come to the dinner. It's one night. Please. Dad, this is childish. Call me back. I tossed the phone face down on the counter and turned back to my coffee. The steam had faded. The moment hadn't. I made myself a real breakfast. Scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, sliced avocado. The kind of meal I used to dream about when I was living on vending machine granola bars and working 2 jobs through college. They didn't want me. Not when I was struggling, not when I was invisible. But now that Caleb needed to look like he had a stable, well-adjusted family, I was suddenly expected to show up, smile, and disappear again. 3 days passed. Calls continued. Guilt piled on top of thinly veiled manipulation. I said nothing. And on the 4th morning, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Grandma Helen. I exhaled and answered. "Hi, Grandma." "Sweetheart," she said, her voice warm like sunlight on skin. "How are you settling into Colorado?" "I love it here," I said honestly. "It's peaceful. The mountains are unreal." "I'm glad. Your parents asked me to call." I leaned against the wall, smile fading. "Let me guess. They want you to convince me to fly back for Caleb." "They do," she said gently. "But I'm not going to. I just wanted to hear your voice and tell you I understand." And in that moment, I realized something. The people who truly love you never force you to prove your worth. By Friday evening, the silence I had held so firmly had become unbearable. For them, not me. I was slicing vegetables for dinner when the text started again. "Mom. Sweetheart, we understand you're upset, but this isn't the time. Caleb's wedding is important for our family's image." "Dad. This behavior is unacceptable. You're making things harder for everyone." "Caleb. Savannah, please, they're freaking out. Just come. One dinner, then you can disappear again if you want." That line, "then you can disappear again," sat in my chest like a stone. They didn't want me back. They wanted my cooperation. I turned off the burner, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and walked to the window. The sun was setting over the mountains, streaking the sky with a fiery orange, but I felt none of its warmth. Their messages weren't about love or reconciliation. They were about damage control. I'd disrupted the narrative. I was no longer the silent sibling in the background of Caleb's shining storyline. I had become a problem that needed managing, and that made me dangerous. By Saturday morning, the calls escalated. Voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. An old aunt I hadn't spoken to in years left a long, rambling message about how families drift apart but come back together during milestones. A cousin DM'd me on Instagram. "Are you okay? Your mom's been asking everyone for your new address." I didn't answer any of them. But what truly confirmed it wasn't love. It was politics. Was the voicemail Dad left just after noon. "Savannah, we had to tell Caleb's in-laws you were sick. They were asking why you weren't at the dinner. We covered for you, but this wedding is in 3 weeks and you need to be there. This is about family and perception. Perception, not truth, not healing. Perception." I was about to delete the message when another one came through. This time, Dad's tone was lower, calculated. "If you don't come to the wedding, I'll disinherit you. That's not a threat. It's a fact." I actually laughed out loud. Alone in my kitchen, arms crossed, laughing like someone had just told the punchline to a joke I'd been waiting 29 years to hear. Disinherit me? I made more money in a month than they'd ever given me in a lifetime. That night, I called Grandma Helen. She picked up after the first ring. "Savannah, honey, I just need to hear a voice that makes sense," I said, my own voice wobbling more than I wanted it to. "I heard about the threats," she said, already knowing. "And about the lies they told at that dinner. They're spiraling, aren't they?" "They said I was sick." "That's convenient," she replied dryly. "Now they're telling relatives you've lost touch with reality." Of course they were. "I'm just tired," I said. "Tired of the spin. Tired of being treated like a PR inconvenience instead of a person. I know you are, and I know you're not wrong. You've done nothing but survive what they ignored." I blinked fast, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm not going to the wedding." "I wouldn't expect you to. Even if it means losing whatever crumbs of inheritance they're dangling." She sighed, long and low. "Sweetheart, Their money is nothing compared to your peace. And trust me, Caleb's marriage will have more to worry about than whether you showed up for photos." That made me pause. "What do you mean?" "I shouldn't say much," she murmured. "But let's just say the bride's parents noticed more than your absence." I leaned forward, tension threading through me. "Like what?" "Like how your name only came up when they brought it up. Like how they started asking Caleb why you weren't in any of the stories he told. Why you weren't in any family photos." I closed my eyes, a slow, stunned breath escaping my lips. "They're asking questions," Grandma said. "And your silence? It's louder than anything you could have said." I looked out at the Colorado night. Cool, endless, still. My phone buzzed again on the counter, but I didn't move. Let them panic. Let them scramble. They built their legacy on the illusion of unity, and now that I refused to be part of the set design, the whole stage was trembling, and I wasn't going to fix it, not this time. The messages had slowed to a drip, still there, still demanding, but now tinged with desperation. Words like forgive, reconnect, heal. But none of them sounded like love. They sounded like damage control wrapped in platitudes. So when my phone buzzed again that Sunday morning, I expected more of the same. I almost let it go to voicemail, until I saw the name, Grandma Helen. I answered instantly. "Hey, Grandma," I said, softening without realizing it. "Sweetheart," she exhaled, and the sound of her voice did something to me. It loosened a knot I hadn't even realized was still inside my chest. "I've been thinking about you all week." I moved to the back porch, barefoot, coffee in hand, the air still cool against my skin. "You and half the family, apparently." She chuckled, dry, knowing. "Yes, well, the difference is I don't think you owe anyone a damn thing." I smiled, the first real one in days. "That's why you're the only one I answered." A beat of silence passed, comfortable like worn denim. "I wanted to check on you," she said. "Really check on you. Not to convince you to do anything, not to push someone else's agenda. Just you." I looked out over the foothills, the sky a pale watercolor of blue and gold. "I'm okay," I said. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm calm. For the first time in a long time." "I'm glad to hear that." "I've been hiking a lot, working, looking at houses." I hesitated. "It's not a glamorous life, but it's mine." "Sweetheart, a quiet life you built yourself is worth more than a noisy one handed to you with strings." I swallowed hard, blinking faster than I wanted to. Her words hit deep, like they always did. "They've been saying a lot of things," I said. "That I've abandoned the family, that I'm being selfish, that I'm punishing Caleb." "They're wrong," she replied without hesitation. "They're projecting. You made choices to protect your peace, and they're only upset because it exposed what's been broken for years." I leaned back in my chair, letting the morning sun land on my face. "Do you think I'm cruel?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "No. I think you've been cornered for so long that standing up for yourself feels unfamiliar. But that's not cruelty. That's recovery." I nodded slowly, letting her words settle. "You always make it make sense." "That's because I've had a lifetime of watching people pretend silence means consent. But you finally broke the cycle." Her voice caught slightly, and I could picture her, sitting in her little kitchen in Durham, fingers wrapped around a floral mug, still wearing that silk robe she never let anyone else see. "You were always the quiet one," she said, "but not because you had nothing to say, just no one who wanted to hear it." I closed my eyes. That line, "just no one who wanted to hear it," unlocked something in me. Not rage, not grief, just clarity. "You were the only one who ever really listened," I whispered, "and I always will." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't require filling, the kind that healed. "I'm not going to the wedding," I said finally. "I know. They can take me out of the will, write me out of their photos, pretend I'm some lost branch on the tree." "And what will you do?" I smiled to myself, watching a hawk circle lazily above the pines. "I'll plant my own tree." She laughed then, light and full of pride. "That's my girl." Before we hung up, she added, "Don't let them twist this into cruelty. What you've done is an act of self-love, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for others is not let them keep hurting you." "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, Savannah. More than they ever let you know." After we ended the call, I stayed out there a while longer. Just me, the bird song, and a peace that wasn't performative. It was earned. They could keep their drama. I had my freedom. And the only voice that truly mattered had just told me I was already enough. The wedding came and went without me. I didn't even mark the date on my calendar, but I knew when it arrived. The texts stopped. The calls went quiet. A temporary ceasefire. I spent that weekend in the mountains. No cell service, no guilt. Just me, the scent of pine, and the rustle of wind moving through tall trees. I hiked a trail called Devil's Backbone, boots crunching over dry leaves, and somewhere along a rocky overlook, I realized I didn't feel sad. Not even a little. Not about missing the vows, not about missing the cake, not about missing the performance, because that's all it ever would have been, performance. Me, propped up in some pastel dress, pretending to belong beside people who had only remembered I existed when silence started to make them look bad. When I got back to town Sunday night, there was a voicemail waiting from Grandma Helen. "Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to update you on, well, everything." Her voice was gentle, but something in it told me she'd been holding back tears. It was tense, Savannah. You could feel it in the room. Your parents were stiff. Caleb looked like he hadn't slept. They kept making excuses for why you weren't there. First, they said you were sick. Then that you had a work emergency. Then something about a delayed flight. The bride's parents didn't believe a word of it. I sat at my kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly louder than usual. "They were polite, of course," she continued. "But you could see it. Questions behind their smiles. I overheard them asking Caleb's best man if you even existed." I closed my eyes. "I think that's when it started to unravel," she said. "Your mom tried to steer every conversation back to Caleb's residency program or the floral arrangements, but every time your name came up, she flinched." I imagined it clearly. My parents fumbling through small talk, the weight of a missing daughter dragging on every photo op. I heard, secondhand, of course, that the bride's father asked Caleb why there were no recent pictures of you, why you weren't listed in the program, why no one seemed to talk about you unless prompted. I could almost feel it, Caleb fumbling for a lie that sounded like love. Grandma paused. "Your absence didn't just raise eyebrows, sweetheart. It raised mirrors, the kind your parents have spent decades avoiding." Later that night, she sent me photos from the wedding. I didn't ask for them. She just knew I'd want to see. And I did. Not out of curiosity, out of closure. My parents were smiling, but it didn't reach their eyes. My mother's hands were clutched too tightly in front of her. My father's posture too rigid. Caleb, he looked tired, pale. In almost every frame, he was looking off to the side, toward the entrance, toward the crowd, almost like he was expecting someone. Expecting me. But I wasn't coming. Not then. Not ever. One photo struck me most. The bride's parents. Both of them had that stern, polite expression people wear when they've been disappointed but are too dignified to say so. The caption Grandma included simply read, "They noticed." I stared at the screen for a long time, a strange calm washing over me. Not triumph, not bitterness, just peace. Because for the first time, it wasn't me who had to explain their behavior. It wasn't me pointing out the imbalance or begging to be seen. The truth had walked in without me and spoken louder in my absence than I ever could have managed face to face. It took only 3 days after the wedding for the fallout to find me, not directly, of course, not in the form of apology or reflection or remorse. That would have required self-awareness. No. What arrived was panic, dressed in new phone numbers and recycled excuses. I was sitting on my balcony, feet tucked under me, laptop open on my knees as I browsed real estate listings, something I'd started doing lately with more intention than daydreaming, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't flinch. Just let it ring. Then it buzzed again. A text this time. "Savannah, it's Caleb. I know you blocked me, but I got a new number. We need to talk." 5 minutes later. "My in-laws are asking a lot of questions about you, about the family. This is affecting my marriage." I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I knew I wouldn't. Delete. Then, "Please, just call me back." "Just call? I know we messed up. I'm sorry. Delete." The messages kept coming, from Caleb, from my mother. Even one from a family friend I hadn't spoken to since high school. "Your dad's worried. They say you're completely out of contact, that you're being cold. Is everything okay?" Cold. That was their new narrative now. Savannah, the detached daughter. The ungrateful sister. The emotional liability, conveniently ignoring the years they treated me like a family accessory instead of a member. That evening, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Grandma Helen. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice was soft, but I could hear the fatigue, the undercurrent of something heavier. "I wanted to update you. I think you'll want to hear this." I set my tea down, instantly alert. "What's going on?" "Well," she began, "it seems the bride's parents still haven't let it go. They've had multiple conversations with your parents. Polite, but firm. They want answers." "About me?" I asked, though I already knew. "Yes. About why you weren't at the wedding, about why you were absent from every event leading up to it, about why your name was barely mentioned unless someone else brought it up." I sank back into the cushions, silence blooming in my chest. "And your parents," she continued. "They're scrambling. They've been calling anyone who knows you, asking if they've spoken to you recently, asking what you've been telling people." "I haven't told anyone anything," I said flatly. "I know that," she said. "But the silence? It's louder than any explanation you could have given, and it's unraveling everything they tried to present." She paused. "There was a conversation last night after the bride's parents returned from their honeymoon dinner. I wasn't there, but I heard it through another relative. Apparently, they told Caleb point blank, 'We don't understand how someone can erase their daughter from a family narrative and expect no one to notice.'" I inhaled slowly. "They said it's not about the wedding anymore, it's about trust, about the kind of people they're marrying into." I was quiet for a long time, and then I whispered, "So they finally saw it." "They did. And Caleb?" "I don't know, sweetheart," she said gently. "I think he's starting to see it too. But he's caught, torn between protecting his perfect image and admitting what's been true all along." The truth was no longer hidden in my absence. It was written across every awkward smile, every fabricated excuse, every space where I should have been, and wasn't. I imagined the tension, the glances, the moments the bride's family turned cold, the ripple effect my non-presence had created in a room built for pretend unity. "They thought I was the problem," I murmured, "but all I did was step out of the photo." "And by doing so," Grandma said, "you made them answer for the frame." I looked out into the night, the air cool against my skin, a quiet kind of victory humming in my bones. No revenge, no confrontation, just truth, rising like smoke in the space I left behind. And I didn't have to raise my voice to set the whole thing burning. The world was unraveling in Durham, but here in Boulder things were blooming. It had been 2 weeks since the wedding, and every now and then a ripple from the past still tried to find its way through. Another unknown number. A voicemail I didn't listen to. A message from a relative I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly checking in. But those moments were brief, like leaves brushing past a closed window. I didn't open it. Instead, I stayed inside my own peace. I'd fallen into a rhythm I didn't even realize I was capable of before. Slow mornings with strong coffee, deep work sessions at a company where people actually thanked me for what I built, and evenings spent walking trails lined with golden aspens, headphones in, thoughts drifting somewhere between memory and momentum. One afternoon, I was scrolling through house listings again when Monica FaceTimed me. "Okay," she said the second I answered. "Let's see the top 3. I turned the camera toward my laptop. "You're becoming entirely too invested in my home search. That's because I need to live vicariously through someone who isn't stuck in a 5th-floor walk-up with a neighbor who practices death metal at 2 a.m. I laughed, dragging a listing into the favorites folder. "Fair?" She tilted her head. "You're glowing, by the way, like weirdly radiant." "It's just the lighting." "It's not. You're different, Sav." I paused for a second. "I feel different." "How so?" I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting to the window. "For the first time, I'm not surviving my life. I'm inhabiting it." "God," she said. "That's beautiful." We talked for another hour, flipping through floor plans and debating the value of a guest room versus a home office with a view. But even after we hung up, her words lingered. "You're glowing." She was right. And not because anything dramatic had changed. In fact, the most astonishing part of it all was how normal things had become. No noise, no guilt, no late-night spirals over what I should have said or done differently. Just a quiet steadiness that had taken root and, day by day, grown stronger. I no longer checked my phone hoping to see an apology. I no longer rehearsed confrontations in the shower, imagining what I'd say if they finally really asked what happened. I no longer wondered if cutting them out made me cruel. It didn't. It made me whole. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop still open to an email draft for my real estate agent, I found myself opening the folder of wedding photos Grandma Helen had sent. I hadn't looked at them since the night they arrived. I clicked through them slowly. Their body language said everything their words had tried to cover. Stiff shoulders, tight smiles, eyes that scanned the room too often. A backdrop meant to sell the story of family, but no one truly believing it. And then there was the photo that stopped me cold, Caleb and his bride, standing before the altar. But his eyes weren't on her. They were looking toward the crowd, toward the back of the room, toward a space that should have held his sister, but didn't. It was all there, in the emptiness. I closed the laptop, exhaled deeply, and stood. The sky outside had turned the color of lavender and dust, soft and endless. I didn't feel bitter, or proud, or vindicated. I just felt free. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is not show up for a version of yourself that never existed. And sometimes, the strongest move you'll ever make is walking away so quietly, no one hears the door close, until the whole house starts echoing with your absence. It started with a text, a single buzz that lit up my screen on a Tuesday night while I was halfway through making dinner. I glanced down, expecting a reminder from my bank or a sale notification, but it was from an unknown number. Savannah. "It's Mom. I got a new phone. Please call me. We need to talk." I stared at it for a full minute, spoon hovering over the pot of pasta like gravity had let go. The message wasn't angry. It wasn't manipulative. It was soft. That's what made it so jarring. An hour later, another one came. "Savannah, I know you're seeing these. Your father and I realize we made mistakes. We want to fix things. Fix." As if you could patch over decades of silence with a few lines of digital regret. I didn't respond. Not because I hadn't wanted this once, not because I was immune to the ache, but because I knew what this was. I'd felt the difference between love and image management, and this wasn't love. This was cleanup. "We're proud of you now. We know we should have told you that sooner." Now. They were proud now, when the neighbors were asking questions, when the bride's family had stopped pretending. When the silence had become inconvenient. "Elliot's marriage is struggling. This tension is making everything worse. We need you, Savannah." And there it was. Not "we miss you," not "we see you," just "we need you." I placed my phone face down on the counter, turned off the stove, and opened a window. The breeze rolled in slow and clean, the kind that carried no weight, no noise. They had every opportunity to speak before. Every chance to listen, to ask, to wonder why their daughter had disappeared from the center of their orbit. They didn't. They only noticed when the absence burned brighter than my presence ever had. The next morning, I changed my number. I gave the new one to only 5 people. Monica, Tyler, my boss, my realtor, and Grandma Helen. The rest of the world could stay behind the wall. But it didn't stop there. Over the next week, the messages came in through every crack they could find. Facebook requests from relatives I didn't recognize, emails sent to my old school account, even a LinkedIn message from Caleb. "Savannah, we're all sorry. Can we just talk once? Delete. You're still our sister." This doesn't have to be permanent. Delete. They're trying, Savannah. Doesn't that mean something? And that one I almost answered. Almost. Because yes, once upon a time I would have clung to even a half-hearted attempt. I would have bent myself backward to meet them halfway, even when they hadn't moved an inch. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the woman who built her own table, who sat down to dinner each night not wondering what it would cost her, who stopped waiting for people to see her and started seeing herself. That week, I toured a house just outside the city, 3 bedrooms, lots of light, a small garden out back where I imagined tomatoes growing under the summer sun. The realtor asked if I'd be living alone. "Yes," I said, smiling, "but not lonely." That night, as I curled up on the couch with a book and a cup of tea, another email slid in from my father. "I wrote you a letter. I'd like to send it if I knew where you lived." I didn't even open it. I just blocked the email address and let it drift into the quiet void it belonged to. Because here's the thing no one teaches you. Sometimes closure doesn't come wrapped in an apology. Sometimes it's not a big final conversation or a shared cry in the driveway. Sometimes closure is the silence you choose, the door you leave locked, the peace you preserve by never going back. I poured myself another cup of tea, wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders, and leaned into the quiet. They were finally ready to talk. But I had nothing left to say. It happened over dinner with coworkers. A Thursday night thing, nothing fancy, just tacos and IPAs at a laid-back spot near Pearl Street. The kind of gathering where you talk about anything but work. We were sitting on the patio under string lights, everyone leaning in against the early fall chill. Laughter moved easily between us, like we'd all known each other longer than a few months. "So," said Jenna, one of our UX designers, "do you have siblings?" The question came out casually. No big weight behind it. Just one of those icebreakers people throw when they're ready to get personal, but not too personal. I didn't flinch. I didn't even pause. "Nope," I said, lifting my glass. "Only child." There was a beat, half a second at most, before the conversation moved on. Someone started talking about a disastrous road trip. Another person chimed in with a story about their twin brother getting mistaken for them at a job interview. But in that sliver of time between question and answer, I felt something shift inside me. Not guilt, not grief, relief. Because I meant it, not in a literal sense. I knew full well I had a brother, Caleb Mitchell, golden boy of Durham, North Carolina. The kid who got the parties, the attention, the future already paved for him while I built mine out of gravel and grit. But in every way that mattered, I didn't have a brother. I didn't have someone who asked where I went when I vanished. I didn't have someone who tried to understand the silence. I didn't have someone who called just to say, "I miss you." And at some point, a relationship that one-sided stops being real. It becomes theater. And I'd walked off that stage long ago. Later that night, walking home beneath a sky heavy with stars, I thought about how easy it had been to say those 4 words. I don't have siblings. There was no sting, no lingering ache, just the simplicity of choosing truth over obligation. At home, I curled up on the couch, still wearing my jacket, letting the warmth of the night linger a little longer. My phone buzzed. A group text from Monica and Tyler. "Monica, just checking. Are we still on for Sunday brunch?" Tyler, "Hell yes, I'm bringing pumpkin muffins." Me, "Wouldn't miss it. I'll make the cinnamon chai. These were my people. They didn't share my DNA, but they knew when I needed space and when I needed soup. They celebrated my wins and sat with me in my silences. They noticed when I walked into a room and didn't need a crisis to reach out. The kind of family you choose, not the one you inherit. And I'd spent too long thinking blood was the tie that mattered most. Now I knew better. I reached for the book sitting next to me, flipped to the dog-eared page, but stopped halfway through the sentence. Because in that moment, the truth landed fully in my chest. I didn't need to rewrite the past to feel whole. I just had to stop dragging it with me into every room. So, no, I didn't have a brother. I had a life, and that was more than enough. 6 months passed like breath, quiet, steady, full of movement beneath the surface. Most days were unremarkable in the best way. Meetings that ended on time, hikes that cleared my head, weekend brunches with Monica and Tyler where we laughed too loud and stayed too long. But then, one Tuesday afternoon, something changed. I was mid-call with a client, reviewing some back-end architecture, when a Slack message from my manager popped up. "Can you hop on a quick Zoom after this?" "It's good news." The smiley face threw me off. I half expected it to be about a promotion that was still months away on paper, but when I joined the call, my manager, Lisa, was already grinning. "We've been watching your metrics," she said. "Your team's output, your leadership on the new rollout. It's impressive, Savannah." I blinked, trying not to get ahead of myself. "And we're bumping you up early. Senior engineer, 30% salary increase. It's effective next pay cycle." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My screen blurred slightly, the corners of my vision tightening, not with anxiety, but awe. I didn't cry, but I did laugh. One of those full-bodied, disbelieving laughs that sounded like exhale and victory at the same time. "Thank you," I said. "Seriously, thank you." "You've earned it." That night, I drove out to a small lookout point just past city limits. The sky was velvet black, pinpricked with stars. I sat on the hood of my car, jacket zipped to my chin, wind in my hair, and thought about how far I'd come. There were no witnesses, no applause, no champagne toasts or proud parent calls, just me. And somehow, that made it sweeter. I remembered being 19, sitting on the floor of my dorm room with 2 part-time jobs and a box of dry ramen, wondering if this kind of life, calm, secure, respected, was ever going to be possible. Not perfect, just mine. The next morning, I booked a solo trip to Japan. No one's approval required, no need to check in, just a plane ticket, a list of bookstores and temples, and 5 full days of silence I didn't have to explain. I sent a selfie to Grandma Helen from a Kyoto side street, tea in hand, cherry blossoms overhead, peace in my expression. "Savannah, living my best life." Grandma Helen: "I see that glow. You've always had it, baby. They just never knew where to look." I felt like I was rewriting my inheritance, not in dollars or heirlooms, but in the way I moved through the world now. After I got back from Japan, I took myself out to dinner. Just me. Steak, red wine, chocolate cake, and a quiet toast to the girl who never gave up, even when no one was watching. When I got home, there was a letter in my mailbox. Handwritten. My father's name in the return corner. The handwriting was unmistakable, blocky and heavy, like he'd been pressing down too hard his whole life. I didn't open it. I didn't even hesitate. I dropped it in the trash with the junk mail and closed the lid. Because here's the truth. Not every success needs to be shared with the people who never clapped for you. Not every chapter needs a reconciliation arc. Some chapters end quietly, with dignity, with distance, and with the undeniable fact that you've become everything they said you couldn't, not in spite of their neglect, but because you stopped waiting for them to change. The second letter came a week after I tossed the first one in the trash. Same blocky handwriting, same Durham return address, but this time, something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet confidence that nothing inside could hurt me anymore. Or maybe, deep down, I needed to know if he'd finally said the one thing I'd been waiting for my whole life. I brought it inside, set it on the counter, and stared at it like it might explode. It sat there all day. While I cooked, while I answered emails, while I watered the tiny rosemary plant on my windowsill. Around midnight, I finally opened it. No salutation. No Savannah. Just 4 paragraphs in that same pressed-down handwriting. I've been thinking about what I said the last time we talked. I regret it. All of it. Especially the way I dismissed you at Tyler's wedding. That wasn't about you. That was about me, and everything I failed to understand when you were younger. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for a second chance. Your mother and I are divorcing. It's not your fault, but I thought you should know. I see now that I let her voice become mine for too long. I failed to be your father. I see that now. I don't expect a response. But if you want to talk, my number hasn't changed. I'd like to hear about your life, your work, your friends, your peace. I hear you're doing well. And even if I don't deserve to say this, I'm proud of you. I always should have been. The words didn't sting the way they would have once, but they didn't soothe me either. I sat with the letter for a while, let it rest in my palms, read it again, and then I folded it neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into a drawer next to my passport and spare keys. It didn't go in the trash. But I didn't call him either, because here's what people don't understand about healing. It's not about one apology fixing everything. It's about how long you waited for it, and how much life you built in its absence. It's about learning that your peace doesn't require their recognition, that your worth was never theirs to give or take. Monica called later that week. "You sound different," she said after I told her. "Yeah," I replied, my voice calm, "because I'm done needing things from people who only give them when it's too late." There was a pause. Then she exhaled. "I'm proud of you, not just for what you've built, but for what you've let go." I smiled, because that right there was the real reward, not his letter, not his guilt, but the quiet knowing that I didn't have to chase closure. I'd already created it, in every boundary I held, every morning I woke up without dread, every laugh shared with people who saw me fully. My father's letter might have been sincere. Maybe he meant every word. But I wasn't going to build a bridge back to someone who only realized I was gone once the silence became louder than my presence. Some connections aren't broken. They were never real to begin with. And now, finally, I had the power to choose what stayed in my life, and what stayed in the drawer. That parking garage was almost empty, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft echo of my heels on concrete. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd last seen them, Mom, Dad, and Tyler, all standing together in one line, like a perfectly rehearsed tableau of a family I once begged to belong to. Now, they were frozen, eyes wide, as I walked toward the driver's side of my new obsidian black Audi. My name, Savannah Mitchell, etched in soft gold on a small plaque near the reserved spot. Corporate perk. Unmistakable. My hair was pinned up, my navy dress fell in clean, tailored lines, not too formal, not flashy, but enough to say, I made it. I didn't mean for them to see me, but I didn't look away either. Tyler's voice broke the silence. "Savannah?" I turned slightly, offering a nod. "Hey!" Mom's eyes scanned me like she was trying to stitch the girl she once forgot into the woman standing before her. "You look different." "I am." Dad cleared his throat. "We were just, leaving the meeting upstairs." Of course they were. Some real estate seminar, a desperate attempt to reclaim whatever power or image they'd once cared so much about. I placed my coffee in the cup holder and opened the car door. "Savannah," Mom said again, softer this time. "How have you been?" I met her gaze. Not cold, not angry, just honest. "I've been free." They didn't know what to do with that word. Free? From what? From their measuring sticks. From decades of conditional love. From the tightrope of always trying to earn a seat at their table. Tyler stepped forward. "I didn't know you were back in town." "I'm not," I smiled politely. "Just visiting a client?" A silence settled. Heavy, uneasy. Dad looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe another half apology. Maybe nothing at all. But I didn't wait for it. I got into the car, started the engine, and as I shifted into reverse, I caught a glimpse of them in the rearview mirror. Still standing there. Still trying to figure out how the girl they dismissed had built a life that didn't include them. And that's when it hit me. I wouldn't trade any of it. Not the loneliness, not the struggle, not even the grief, because each piece, every goodbye, every slammed door, every birthday passed over in silence, was part of what shaped this moment. This woman, me. Would I have loved a different childhood? Maybe. But would I give up the clarity I have now? Not a chance. As I pulled out of the garage, my phone buzzed. A text from Monica. "Dinner tonight? Your place or mine?" I smiled. Home. It wasn't a house back in Durham. It wasn't tied to a bloodline or a surname. It was who showed up, who stayed, who saw you and still clapped for your every breath. I found that kind of love. But only after I stopped chasing the one that refused to be given. And that's the truth I want to leave you with. Sometimes the apology doesn't come. Sometimes the recognition never arrives. But you still get to heal. You still get to grow. You still get to live a life so full, so true. It makes silence feel like peace, not punishment. So if you're listening to this and you've been there, in the forgotten corner of a family photo, in the echo of unanswered calls, in the pain of being the invisible one, just know, your worth isn't up for debate, and you never needed their permission to become everything they couldn't see. I'm Savannah Mitchell. I left with nothing, and somehow I ended up with everything that matters. If this story touched something in you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And in the comments, tell me, what does freedom look like for you? Because healing doesn't happen alone, and your story, just like mine, deserves to be heard.